Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's edition of BookBytes. We've got a very interesting lineup, and our special guest tonight is writer and editor Bongani Kona, who is also a lecturer at the Department of History at the University of the Western Cape. His work has appeared in a variety of places, including Chimurenga, Safe House, The Daily Assortment of Astonishing Things and Other Stories, the Beffler and BBC Radio 4. He was awarded the Ruth First Fellowship in 2019 and shortlisted for the Kane Prize for African Writing in 2016. And most recently, he has edited a collection called Our Ghosts Were Once People. And this will be our focus for tonight's edition of Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show, Bongani. Wonderful to have this opportunity to chat to you this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Shafinaaz. And yeah, thank you for having me and looking forward to the conversation as well.
Well, as you know, I've really enjoyed this anthology, and I say that it's an important topic. It's a value-driven topic, and it's also that we grapple with this idea of loss and grief, of processing trauma either in its immediacy or with given time, because sometimes it is about reaching back into the past and sort of working around how we process grief. Speak to us about your motivations for putting together a collection like Our Ghosts Were Once People.
Sure. That's always thank you so much for the question, firstly. And I guess it's always a difficult question to answer, in part because I think sometimes, even just from reading newspapers, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint a point. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to pinpoint the exact point where I can say this is where the collection began, because I think I live in Cape Town. And even if it's just reading newspapers after a weekend, the amount of death or violent death that we encounter, even if it's through the news, it's astonishing. So I think part of the major motivation for that is how can we think through the idea of grief from this place, from South Africa, and how can we do it together? And I guess maybe the point at which all of these thoughts kind of crystallized was the tragic death of a UCT student in 2019. I think just like a first-year student by the name of Uyinene. And I think just seeing the kind of pain that people felt at that time, it just seemed like, how do you respond? My question was, how do you respond to something like this? And secondly, can we do this together? So the book that we're going to be talking about, I'm just the editor, but it's really the collection of 30 voices, 32, I think.
Well, I really appreciated the vast array of voices and the different perspectives we got on, whether it was just taking snippets of how death affects us in different ways, the experience of it, the news of it, whether you're reading about death in war-torn regions, whether in Madeleine Fullard's piece, she's part of the committee that's actually reaching back and finding people who were buried in mass graves, people who were killed during the apartheid times. I mean, there's so much to be said about reaching back in order to form a space for healing. And I enjoyed, for example, Khadija Patel's conversation about, performing the ritual of getting people ready for burial, getting people's sort of loved ones ready for burial, the emotive around that. And Karen Shimke's story of her interrogating her relationship with her father. So these relationships that we interrogate through grieving are so important, and they documented in this, which I find so valuable for anyone reading about how we process grief. Do you think regret is a great motivator?
Wow, that is, thank you so much also for the beautiful comments. Wow. I guess let's in the current Shimka piece that you brought up, I guess I don't think there's any regret there. It's just someone who's trying to come to terms with a complicated figure in her life, in this case, the figure being her father, who was both abusive but was also capable of even just tiny moments of kindness. And I think she's kind of reflecting. I think that piece is interesting to me specifically because you would assume that in a collection like this, people are writing primarily about people that they love, not necessarily primarily people who also did them harm. And so I guess, yeah, regrets. I don't know how to answer the question properly, and I tend to waffle if you let me go on for too long. But I wouldn't say regret is the primary emotion. Does that answer your question? But I'm also curious why you pointed to regret. Would you like to share a bit about that as well?
I think when I read across the board, when I read across the board the various pieces, it wasn't just one, but I thought, we reach into memory because sometimes I don't know if we close off trauma as a dissociative practice, it's something that we'll deal with later, or if we deal with trauma as, it's just too much to process all at once. So it comes out in pieces. And then it helps us to understand and find meaning in that loss. So it wasn't just Karan Shimka's piece I'm referring to, but various pieces of what if, like when you have a car crash and you think, could I have done things differently? So that kind of not a punitive regret, but a sort of to say, what if I had? And I love how writing allows us that opportunity to reflect, to rewrite the script in a way, to say this, this is what it meant, or this is so you start to unpack what that person meant to you, and it's going to, being authentic means it's not always going to be a wonderful experience that you're remembering. You're going to remember various aspects of that experience, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a lover or a child or whatever the case might be. So I found it really, really interesting. In Shabnam Khan's piece, she writes about death in these snippets, not to devalue, but to say, we have these regular freeze frame experiences of death, and it impacts on us, even if it happens really quickly. Because, I mean, living through a pandemic, if we look at how quickly we've heard death notifications, you barely have time to process one, and there's another news. And not all are related to COVID. So, it's all of this has brought a lot of thought and reflection around how we relate to our loved ones, how we relate to each other. And that's where the word regret came out for me.
No, thank you so much. Again, also thank you so much for the beautiful comments. My There's the phrase which you uttered earlier, which is the "what if," and which led me to think about Dr. Srikant Peters' piece. And for those who do not know, Dr. Srikant, or for those who haven't read the book, as a medical doctor, and he's writing about his internship at a hospital unnamed in Durban, or let's say KZN, rather, government hospital in KZN. And he's 23 at the time, and there's also a patient who's 23, but from a different class position, who ends up dying while he's on the shift, overworked as an intern. But he also recognizes that she's come from vastly much more um, dehumanizing circumstances, or rather that her life, she didn't stand a chance. Like, she didn't stand a chance. So many things were stacked against her. And it's something that he hasn't forgotten. Of course, he's not 23 anymore, but there's this sense of looking back with, I'm trying not to say regret, but with such, I can't find the word, and maybe we can find it together. That looking back is haunted by that experience. And it's, yeah, even after the book had gone to print and it come back, that's still one of the most difficult stories to read. I think the last thing I'll say about that, because the woman at the center of the story, the 23-year-old woman at the center of it, is really let down by multiple systems, like let down by public hospital systems, let down by so many systems, that she ends up dead, not because of her own choosing, but because of how the system is set up against her.
Speak to us about your story. I found that, it was really sort of humbling that you're able to reach back into a story that has generational impact, obviously, on your family, a narrative from the past. And tell us more about, or a little bit about, writing that story and shaping that, putting it into words.
Thank you so much again for the question. Um, yeah, it wasn't an easy story to write, I think. And for those who do not know, it's really about, it centers around the death of my grandfather some 40 years prior, and under tragic circumstances that my family never really kind of spoke about. And the thing that precipitated my writing of the story is because I grew up with my grandmother, and she passed away in 2019, sort of a few weeks before her 97th birthday. And I knew there's so many, like so many people, I guess there's so many silences in our families, and sometimes traumatic situations like that is, I can understand that. But I just wanted to dig into that and just to find out more about this particular silence that really informed so much of my family's life. It informed where we lived. It informed so much of our own choices. But it was something that was kind of unspoken, and I just wanted to dig deep into that. I don't know if I did it well, certainly, but it's still something that I'm still kind of still working towards. It's not a story that's finished, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that if writing offers us an opportunity not just to interrogate the unspoken, but to sort of dig into and provide a platform for all of perhaps your family members and the rest of us reading, to interrogate some of our own unanswered questions about loss, then I think it's such a powerful thing, and it's a forgiving thing as well, because it allows self reflection but self forgiveness. And it brings us back to that what if.
Thank you. Might just jump in there if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Shafina. As you were speaking, I suddenly had a thought that I don't know if you've read Habiba Badrun's poetry. In one of her poems, I think it's from A Hundred Silences. It's called How Not to Stop. And so I hope, please forgive me if I mess up the history here, because I don't have it in front of me. But the story at the heart of it is that her family was forcibly removed from Claremont in Cape Town, and then she grew up the year. She was born the year after when they were, I think, in Athlone. And this particular poem is like it's told from a schoolgirl's point of view, and she's talking about her father who comes to collect her, and you can see this father from the schoolgirl's point of view, and he drives past the house that they were forcibly removed from, and he doesn't look at it, even though he'd made the front door with his own hands. And it's just like, and it's such a, I think it's, I don't know, it's about 14 lines. It's not a very long poem, but it's like so moving. And I think I can understand that idea. Sometimes with traumatic memories, I'm no specialist in this at all, but I understand that sometimes the generation that goes through it is unable to talk about it. And sometimes it's the second generation or even the generation after that's able to look back, but the generation that goes through that particular traumatic event might not be able to talk about it. But that's just, like I said, I'm no expert.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that there's so many narratives of people who and breadwinners in our families who were disempowered by those forced removals, who weren't able to act against the injustices of the time, and lived with that and it became, generational trauma, the wondering of going back home, the sense of home, the feeling of home, and of home being sort of torn away, from families in such, sort of with such drastic measures. So absolutely something to, to revisit in these kinds of discussions about grief and trauma healing. And I recently, I just quickly want to mention that I recently came upon a conversation on Facebook where some young, sort of somebody was working corporate in another space, They'd been relocated to District 6 because I think there's been some gentrification and offices developed on the outskirts, and they were able to overlook the areas where their grandfathers had grown up and that they had been removed from. And it was a beautiful sort of reenactment, or in some way poetic, justice revisited, that they were able to be in those spaces again. So I think, memory, finding forgiveness in these injustices that were enacted upon people in different spaces, and time does, turn. The wheel does turn. So it's amazing that these stories that you have documented here are also stories of hope, stories of coming full circle, people writing in retrospect. So while there's memory triggered through certain experiences, the taste of food, the clothes we wear, the sights and sounds, there's also this coming full circle in the cycle of grief. And how much does writing play a part in that? I think you've already answered that in a sense by putting this book together. But speak to us a bit about that as we round up.
Wow, thank you for again such a really great question. And I don't know if there's a definite answer because I was now thinking about Paula Akukizibwe's piece, which is a very short piece called "How to Kill a Man," and it is something that I know from having spoken with her during the process, something that she really struggled to write, and it's a piece about um, the killing of a student when she was still at a university, and I think she was second year, and the student herself was also second year, was killed by another student who's also, I don't think she mentions the age of the particular student who was the ex-boyfriend. It happens in a res, and like 10 years later, she's writing this piece, but there's no sense of any kind of healing that comes from it because it's still a traumatic event. But I think what she's able to do, I think in that piece, which is so beautiful, is to memorialize this person. And which I find like to this day, even when I still read that piece, I still choke up because the person can't be returned to us. But I think what she does there is then to kind of build a memorial to this young person who really, who tragically murdered. And so I guess maybe writing in that part, maybe for us as readers. I don't know. I'm speaking in circles, and I can trust that you'll be able to help me here, and you can just jump in. And then, yeah, I don't know what else to add.
Well, I agree with you because I think that, reaching in and writing and sort of memorializing those who have gone in often tragic circumstances is one way of allowing them to reclaim that space and the power that was taken away from them. Bongani, thank you so much for the time that you've put together this really beautiful collection. I know I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that more people will not only be reading it. I was really thrilled to see Ishtiaq Shukri as one of the contributors because I enjoyed his novels in the past, and I haven't seen anything very recent from him. So his name also jumped out. You've got Susonke Msmang, Mary Watson, Lidudu Malingani, all the big names have contributed beautiful pieces. But I also hope that people will be inspired to reach in and to write their stories, and to work through their grieving in the form of story, even if they're writing for themselves. And I think that this book will inspire that. I hope that many people will be reading. Once again, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Shukran. Thank you so much, Shafinaaz. And yeah, thank you also to the listeners who are listening. And yeah, take with you.
Afwan, and there you have it. Our Ghost Who Wants People, an intimate title about giving form to what we've lost and what we grieve and how we grieve. And that's it from Book Bites this evening. Until next weekend, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.